Subtractive soap sculpture. All right, materials and tools. A bar of soap, pencil, needle tool or other sharp item, wooden skewer, a chopstick would work, wooden modeling tool if you have one, a loop tool, a butter knife, a metal one is better, and a piece of paper. So I want to trace my soap to get the exact size, and now I'm going to draw my design. I'm doing a croissant. So you want to think about layout and everything and size, use the most amount of space as possible. I'm going to cut this out, keeping the size of my soap tracing. And then I want to transfer this onto the soap. I'm using a needle tool to poke holes. If you've ever done this with, say, pumpkin carving, it's the same general principle. I'm mostly focusing on the outside with a little bit of detail about the major form. And then I'm going to connect these dots using my kind of wooden stylus. A pencil could work here, or the needle tool. Now I want to flip this over, and I need to make sure that I'm flipping my image as well so that I'm getting a mirror image and not, especially if you're doing something with more detail than a croissant, say like one leg is on one side and not the other, you don't mess that up. So same technique here, right, with just poking through. And then again, connecting those dots. All right, so next up, I need to test out my tools. I like to do this first so that I can have an idea of what my tools do. I noticed that that plastic knife is not as sturdy, so I grabbed a butter knife and went from there. Okay, so then I need to start to actually carve. So I'm going to carve out the outline of my form. And you can try a few different tools here. I ended up going with a knife. I do want to recommend that you don't cut too deeply because I did it a little too harshly at an angle. It wanted to cut in, so just go a little bit at a time, right? So see, these smaller scrapings are much easier to control, and you're less likely to make a big mistake. And sometimes I'll switch up my tools. Maybe my hand gets tired holding one over the other, or this tool is better for reaching into a kind of recessed area. I've also seen people use like a vegetable peeler effectively here. So lots of tools can work, especially kitchen tools. And the nice thing is you're working with soap, right? So it's not going to get too dirty. All right, so I'm kind of going inward and defining that form. And I'm taking a look at it as I go, right? Like really paying attention to what are my next steps, what is still really awkward looking, how do I shave it down, going at it from all angles, not just one point of view, because then I'm going to really forget about another side. So I find it really helpful to work around in multiple ways. So I've pretty well defined the general shape of it from the top view, right? And so now I'm just shaving it down, but I need to think about the side view and also the bottom. So here I'm actually thinking about the bottom here. It's really flat and it's very clear that it's still this like bar of something. And so I need to round it out because a croissant isn't perfectly flat on the bottom. It is rounded, right? It's puffed up from the baking. Most natural objects are not going to be super planted and flat on the ground. So rounding those edges is going to be important to giving that life and dimension. All right, so now I want to think about the side view, right? It's not going to be perfectly the same thickness the whole way around, right? So I'm marking out on the top again because that got a little bit smeared, but also on the side where I want to start to cut down and making sure that those points connect around my piece, right? I don't want to carve from one end and realize that I needed to do it at a different angle because I didn't take into account it wrapping around something. So here I'm still shaving down those side edges to round it out more. So a lot of these, incremental changes are going to make a big difference in the total piece. But it's much better to do it a little at a time because you can less likely to mess up a big chunk. Now, if you do this over multiple days, I do recommend wrapping your soap in plastic. It actually keeps it from drying out and becoming brittle, so that's really helpful. So now I'm starting to round it out more. I'm kind of overlapping and going in multiple directions with this loop tool. You can see it starting to take shape. So I'm just marking out where I need to adjust again. All right, so really checking my work, right? Like I'm moving it around a lot because that's how I'm going to make sure that every point of view is accurate and has life to it. So from here, I'm really focusing on that bottom edge because it's so easy to not notice it. And at this point, it's going to be a lot harder to notice or realize that this is, originated as a bar of soap or whatever you're working with. So you don't have to carve bars of soap. That's just a really readily available, relatively cheap material, right? But, subtractive carving could be done with many types of materials, even other ones found around the home. So I've switched to my wooden modeling tool, and I find that kind of using the flat side of it, and a popsicle stick could work here too. The flat side kind of gently scrapes away and smooths it in a way that my other tools don't. So I'm trying to kind of get rid of those carving lines now and smooth it out. And so I'm just going to continue to refine here and especially get into those kind of crevices and curves. So I'm starting to now define what are still really important factors like the fold of a croissant, but they're not as structural as the initial parts. So that's your next step, right? Think about kind of those more subtle layers and dimensions that are happening on your piece. And this is really what I'm going to continue to do. I'm going to keep looking. Ideally, you do need a reference photo in front of you. It should be real. I could have a real croissant here, right? So that I'm making sure I'm getting accurate details. I'm not going to end with this. I do need to add more details.